It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
Two new polls are out today, one putting Labour ahead of the SNP for the first time, the other putting them neck and neck. But the Ipsos poll reveals that support for independence during this election is now ahead at 51%. Meanwhile, Tory leader Rishi Sunak has had another bad day, this time struggling to find something that he did without as a child and then picking Sky TV. I'm Lorna Hughes, I'm joined by Rodger, and welcome to Planet Holyrood.
And my last question, because I know we don't have a lot of time, is just obviously, you know, as we've said, you're no longer an MP, you're not standing in this election. You know, someone with your experience, do you not think that you might have a strong voice and a strong contribution to make in somewhere like the House of Lords, for example?
Well, yes.
So Hannah, the outgoing MP and former SNP Commons leader had a lot to say about the electoral crisis as well facing the SNP.
Yeah, he did. Although, you know, he had a lot of interesting things to say. I think that he still believes that, you know, voters trust the SNP to deliver on big projects, which I reminded him maybe that might not always be the case. If you look at ferries and you look at the DRS scheme and you look at the A9, and yeah, Ian Blackford had quite a lot of interesting things to say about that and about, you know, other elements of discussion in his party, Nicola Sturgeon, him ruling out the House of Lords but not ruling out everything. So yeah, it was an interesting discussion, definitely.
Great. Well, let's get on to that later to see the full interview. But the polls today, two of them out. One, as we said earlier, putting the SNP and Labour neck and neck. The other one, putting Labour ahead for the first time. What are your thoughts on this? It's getting, I don't know, it's getting really tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, somebody said to me yesterday that basically Labour could do nothing for the next 3 weeks, absolutely hee-haw, not go out, do absolutely nothing, and they will still win. You know, it was said to me that it's never been more sure an election as this one in terms of who's going to win. But I think it is interesting that, you know, the SNP, who have seen so much support and a huge success and popularity, you know, this is really the first time that we're seeing Labour match that. And as you said, in one case, one poll is putting them actually ahead of the SNP. And you just wonder how much of that is to do with the popularity of Labour, or how much of that is to do with, you know, the turmoil of the SNP. Does it mean Swinney isn't quite, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think it's pretty safe to say that John Swinney is not as popular as Nicola Sturgeon was when she was leader. And
no,
neither was
absolutely no. And, you know, that I suppose that's always going to be the problem. You know, for some people, she was and will remain the most popular SNP leader, and she should still be there. For some people, I think the interesting thing for me is the fact that one of these polls puts independence, you know, at 51%. So that's it, not just neck and neck now, actually ahead, which is fascinating, really, because you know, the rest of these polls that have come out in the last few days, you know, are showing that, yeah, Labour is getting further ahead. We've now got the first one saying that they've overtaken, but yeah, independence is still there. So does that suggest that people don't believe that the SNP are the vehicle to deliver independence anymore? But it's still a want, it's still a need.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably fair to say. I also think, you know, the SNP have run out of ideas when it comes to independence. And I think as well it's interesting because Alex Salmond's Alba Party are quite clearly looking to come in and fill that void when it comes to, you know, the sort of diehard independent supporters who want to put independence as the number one sort of priority for them. I think that people who are like that maybe don't feel like they could put their vote in the SNP at the moment, because the SNP, you know, nobody can say they've not tried. They've tried very hard. They've tried very, you know, a range of different options. We've seen the court case that Nicola Sturgeon took. We saw obviously the referendum, and they've tried various different options, and none of them have been successful so far. And I think, you know, if you do want independence and that is your number one priority, unfortunately, you might be looking to a different party, which is crazy to even say that. But I think as well, you know, one of the other interesting things about these polls that have come out today is the fact that I think it's the poll that has been done for STV, which has basically showed or predicted the Tories to be completely wiped out. You know, they would have no MPs at all. And we know that the Tories are not doing particularly well in this campaign. You know, not just because
Do you think it's been made worse by their leader effectively running off in the middle of it?
Well, I think that's, you know, I think that has never happened before in the history of an election campaign, as a leader, albeit a Scottish leader, but the leader actually moving or announcing that they're going to resign in the middle of a campaign. I don't believe that's happened before. And I'm sure that he will be cursing the Sunday Mail as part of that. But, you know, so that is not going to have helped them whatsoever. I think that Douglas Ross's seat, Andrew Bowie's seat, I think they're both actually very close. It's not a dead cert that they're going to win. And I think none of this is going to do them any favours at all.
And then it's you touched upon it earlier. The tactical voting, I suppose that's what you would call it. People who want independence but do not see the SNP being able to deliver it, and or angry SNP voters wanting independence and thinking it's a protest vote now. So there's a whole load of things at play here. It's going to be one of the most interesting elections, definitely, because we haven't seen this, as you say, Douglas Ross resigning. We have this kind of situation going on between people who may want independence but are not happy about voting SNP, and that's if SNP can get their voters out as well, because
but
that's
as well, the independence thing is interesting because I think that while support for independence might have gone up, right, overall, I think that is probably exemplifies the relationship that Scotland has within the UK at the moment. I think that has been a really divisive period between, you know, Alistair Jack in the Scotland office, who's causing chaos and merry hell and quite enjoying doing that. And then you've had, you know, the SNP sort of fighting with the UK government on lots of different things, the UK government blocking various things, you know, so it's just been a real period of turmoil between the two governments, which, you know, you could kind of logically see why some people might say, well, actually, I'd like to be Scotland to be on its own because we don't need all this nonsense. But then at the same time, we've got the cost of living crisis, the bills are going up for absolutely everyone. So I think that some of those people, we talked earlier about the people who are really, the main priority is independence, but I think for some people, their top priority is not independence. So they're going to go, right, I would like independence. However, I would like my bills to come down. I would like kids to be able to go to university. I'd like the potholes in my street fixed. I'd like my mum to be able to get a doctor's appointment when she needs it. And so those people, even though they might be independent supporters, they know that the SNP is going nowhere with independence right now. So they might say, right, I'm giving my vote to Labour this time because I think that there's more of a chance that they'll actually sort things out in the short to medium term for me. And we can look at independence in maybe 5-10 years' time, you know, the next elections. I think that is what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's interesting. And let's go on to Rishi, who, now this is the famous interview that he had to rush back from Normandy to do, and unfortunately caused another car crash for him. But today there's a clip being released where he effectively says he's asked about what did he have to give up as a child. He was talking about his parents obviously coming over here, and he kind of struggles to actually find anything until he comes up with Sky TV. And it kind of prompts the question, it's just so crass, but equally you think, are we in a position now where are we judging politicians that they have to have had hardship, they have to be working class? We can't have, you know, somebody who's richer than the king ruling the country. I mean, on the other side, obviously Keir Starmer gets it because of his title as well. He's had to kind of almost prove his working class credentials. Do you think this is necessary?
I've got, I mean, we, like, obviously at the Sunday Mail, we, and as women in journalism, we actually talk about this quite a lot, don't we, in terms of like class and how important that is or not when it comes to being able to do your job. And I think there are some similarities there. You know, as a journalist, if I had never experienced any hardship, I would probably find it quite difficult to write about people who have experienced that. I'm not saying I couldn't do it, but I would find it more difficult. And I think that idea is why people think politicians should have some personal experience of hardship. And I'm sorry, but going without bloody Sky Television, it's not a hardship. No. I still don't have Sky Television.
No.
You know,
you should try having a bath, you know, with your mum, kind of watching the immersion switch, or, you know, I'm a child of the 70s, grew up, you know, I was lucky if I'd meet like once a week because it was just so expensive. And
or your electricity meter going off because the top-up card has ran out, or, you know, eating, what are those things, those Campbell's meatballs? I used to get them all the time as a kid, Campbell's meatballs from a tin. I loved them. I actually still love them. You know, I think back to your question, is that, does a politician who's had to live through that, does that make them a better politician than somebody who's never struggled? I don't know the answer, but I do know that as a journalist, I would find it hard to relate to, like, if I was writing a story about somebody who's never suffered or never wanted for anything in their life, I would find that hard to relate to, you know. So I imagine a politician who's never wanted for anything, who's making decisions and laws about people who are struggling, it's hard. You know, I think somebody would be a better politician, a better lawmaker, and a better policymaker if they had first-hand experience of difficulties in some way. You know, whether it's personal from their upbringing, whether it's somebody in their family who's had difficulties, you know, or even a friend or something. You know, it doesn't have to be the way they've been brought up, but just an overall understanding of how people navigate the world and the challenges involved in that. And I think that people associate wealth and class with, you know, a level of comfort that the majority of us don't experience, and therefore you think, well, how do they know what ordinary people suffer?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because we do talk about this a lot, and it's tricky because you can't think that just because somebody is rich means that they should not be a politician, or they would not be an effective, good politician. However, the ones that who are, I think, when you look back at history, who are good, who actually understand the issues, and as you say, have some level of understanding. I mean, I don't know, obviously there was the recent election broadcaster, wasn't it? Was it an interview with the Lib Dem leader? Yeah, and in terms of his child and obviously all the challenges he's faced, and he's shining a light. Now, a lot of people looked at that video and thought, you know what, I may not like his policies, but he's a decent human being who understands something that the rest of them are struggling to deal with at the moment. You could apply the same to somebody like an Anna Sarwar, who obviously comes from, a privileged background. But does that make him unaware of, what's around him, what he's dealing with? I think he shows a great deal of empathy. I think that John Swinney, Hamza, and John Swinney as well, who today I think he was asked about this, and he was talking, and he framed it completely correctly, that he had a good upbringing, with loving parents. And I think perhaps that is the best answer, or the answer that Rishi should have given, rather than mentioning Sky TV.
Yeah, but I am loving all the sort of memes and, all the internet trolling that's going on around that. I just find it very, very funny.
I just don't think, I think he might as well pack up and go home, because nothing he does now is working.
No. He's almost like a toxic Tory, which is unfortunate if he's the Prime Minister during an election campaign.
Very. So. Right, let's get on to Ian Blackford and listen to your full chat with him.
It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
So yeah, thanks very much for joining us today, Ian. I know you must be very busy and amongst all the election campaign, but I think I wanted to kind of start off by asking you, obviously you're leaving the Commons after, what is it now, 9 years you've been there?
Yeah. 9 years as an MP, but I guess really a lifetime around the SNP. So it's the end of a journey in that sense of being an elected politician.
Yeah. So obviously during your time, particularly your time in the Commons, the SNP, I think it's fair to say, have had sort of unparalleled success really in elections. And this could be the first time for the SNP in a long time where, I think it's safe to say it might not be as successful. There's predictions that it could lose, up to 30 seats. How do you think the SNP, who's very used to winning now, is going to be able to deal with that?
Well, look, it is a challenge because the polls are obviously suggesting that we're under quite considerable pressure, and we'll see what happens over the course of the next few weeks. But I suppose if I take that starting point, Hannah, that the SNP have been successful, really post the referendum in 2014, the people of Scotland broadly have put their trust in us, and we need to demonstrate that we continue to be worthy of that trust. I think sometimes we're maybe not very good at talking about some of the things that we've done well. Scotland's been on a journey over the course of the period of the Scottish Parliament. The fact that we don't have tuition fees, the fact we've got the council tax freeze at the time of the cost of living crisis, the fact that we've delivered the child payment, for example. I could list an awful lot more. But I think we do need to pose the questions to the people of Scotland of what type of government do they want. We know there's going to be a Labour government in Westminster, but do you want to have people sent to Westminster by the people of Scotland that will represent their interests, that make sure that we, if you like, that we hold the feet to the fire of any incoming Labour government? And there's going to be a big debate around the issue of the budget, about austerity. There's been the whole shenanigans, and let's call it that, as to whether or not there's £18 billion of cuts to come. Certainly the budget books that we had a few weeks ago would indicate that pressure on the public purse is going to remain in place. So I think there are some real questions, and we all know the pressures that there are in delivering public services, health, education, so many areas. And in some sense, I would almost back off from that, because almost raises the questions, what's the SNP for? what are we seeking to do? And we want to live in a society that you've got public services that work for everybody, that there's hope, there's aspiration, that we can deliver that green transition, that we can get the investment in green energy, that we would take our responsibilities, but not just doing that, Hannah, but making sure that we've got the jobs and investment as well. And I'm not sure that perhaps we've been as good as we could have been in articulating that and showing the leadership, because if you think about North Sea oil way back in the 1970s, we never took the full advantage of that. We never got the full range of jobs in the supply chain. And there's a real danger that the same thing happens again with green energy. We've got to make sure that, just as we've seen in the Highlands with the cable manufacturing facility, these things happen. We get turbine manufacturing, that we get the full wealth effect. And for the very simple reason is we want people in Scotland to have good jobs and out of being able to...
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but, you know, obviously the SNP has been in charge in Scotland for quite a long time. And it has been said by others, you know, that under, say, Nicola Sturgeon and under Humza Yousaf, the SNP has kind of neglected its relationship with business in particular. You know, and I know John Swinney, when he came in, he said that he wanted to sort of rebuild that because he felt it was an important part of rebuilding the economy. You know, do you think that John is the right person to do that? Because obviously that kind of ties in with what you're talking about in terms of creating those jobs and making the most of it.
I do, and you know, to be fair to Nicola and to Humza, I mean, Nicola gave me the responsibility of being our business ambassador, and of course we have to connect with business. We need to show, I mean, to put it bluntly, that the issue of business, of economic growth and delivering social justice are two sides of the same coin. And it's about how do you give people that hope and the aspiration that we can do better. I mean, I talked about oil in the 1970s. I can think back to a report that was published in the 1970s by Sir David Player, who was the chairperson of the Scottish Health Education Group, and it was called Born to Fail. But many of these issues, these challenges that we faced way back in the 1970s, we still face today. And I think one of the challenges for the SNP is to show that independence actually means something. It means creating prosperity. Don't you know, be honest with people about the roadmap that's there, but how are you going to create these jobs? How are you going to create the increase in tax that we need? How are we going to be able to make sure that we do take people out of poverty? And we really need to show genuine leadership over these things. And I guess the reason that we're having our collar felt, if I can put it that way just now in the opinion polls, people really saying that they can still trust the SNP to do these things. Can they trust the SNP to govern, to deliver on health, to deliver on education? And it's up to us to do that. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in the end, in the election on the 4th of July. I hope we have as many colleagues returned as possible. But whatever happens out of that, I think there has got to be that reassessment about how we give leadership to the people of Scotland. You know, when you think about green energy, we've got the potential to increase our output fivefold between now and 2050. So, you know, it's easy enough to say that, but then you've got the how you're going to make that happen. What happens through planning and consenting? What happens about making sure that you don't just generate that energy, but it has an impact in people's lives? So you've got lower energy costs, you've delivered energy security, but not just that, you've then created energy as a resource for us to have an industrial future. But
I think people really trust the SNP. You know, you're saying that people do trust the SNP, but I'm not sure actually if they do. You know, if you look at the SNP's record on, you know, large projects, for example, the A9, the ferries, even, you know, you could say the deposit return scheme. I know it's not the same type of thing, but, you know, when it comes to these projects and these policies, you know, it's fair to say that a complete mess has been made of those. So how can people trust the SNP to get these big things right? And those big things are the things that are needed if Scotland were to become an independent country. You need a government that can actually do and carry out those large projects and not waste millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money in the process.
I think it's fair to say that in some of the things that you talk about, there have been real challenges. And you see what's happened with Ferguson's. Frankly, it's embarrassing, and we should apologise for that. And I would argue that we've begun... Not
one person has been held accountable. No, not one government minister, elected politician. You know, Derek Mackay was kind of thrown under the bus after he'd already left.
People have got to put their hands up and admit where there are failings, and of course there are challenges with the A9. Now, look, on the other side, I could say that we delivered the Queen's Ferry crossing on time, on budget. So there are things that have worked, but we need to excel every week every day on every project, and there are areas where we've come up short. Let's just be honest about that. Let's just be honest about the challenges that we've got in delivering first-class healthcare, that people are not going to have to wait to get into accident and emergency, that people are being treated on time. So we need to think about what do we have to do in order to make sure that we deliver across all that space. Now, look, I can talk about the fact that the performance in health is better than in other parts of the United Kingdom, but it doesn't help because people have expectations and we have to deliver against that. So we have to up our game. One of the things I've argued, when you talk about business, how do we make this work better? So a suggestion I've made, and I hope it's something that government does, is to have an industrial council in the First Minister's office. So you then have the right people around the table. Industrial council led by the First Minister, supported by the civil service, but have the academics, have the industrialists, have the trade unions. You need to have Team Scotland. Whether you stand on the constitutional questions in some respects doesn't matter, because what you need is a Team Scotland that works for the benefit of all. And I think, and one of the challenges in a lot of things that you say, and you look at our politics today, Hannah, our politics are very divided. And of course, people should express their opinions, their differences, whether they're pro-union or whether they support independence. But we need to remember that the job that all of us have is improving the lives of people in Scotland. And Parliament politics has to work an awful lot better than it has done over the course of the last few years.
Yeah, and I know, certainly when John Swinney came in, that was one of the things that really struck me, was his reaching out across the chamber in Holyrood, and also writing to Keir Starmer saying, I want to work with other parties, and acknowledging that he thought it hadn't been done as well as it could have been. I know that, I want to move on maybe to a slightly different.
But can I just very quickly, because I think it's important to do this, and I want Scotland to be independent, and I want the Parliament to be as good as it can be. But also there are times that we need to learn from what works at Westminster, and one of the things that works at Westminster very well, actually, in the main, is the committee system, because people take their responsibilities seriously. But also, as a member of Parliament, you have to think about how you can work across party. And if I think about some of the things that I did, that I worked with others to make sure that we got the Majinsky sanctions, for example. I did that together with Margaret Hodge and actually with Dominic Raab, to make sure that we bore down on the overseas and the Crown dependencies in terms of tax laws as well. So there are times where you have to work together across party. And I think it's important that all parliamentarians recognise that.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. I think in Westminster, even though in some ways it's a more toxic place than Holyrood, in other ways, actually people work, can work quite well together. So,
well, the best example might be my colleague, no longer in Parliament, Ailey Whiteford, when she was the MP for Banff and Buchan, because she got legislation through. She got the Istanbul Convention, which was so important in terms of the issue of women's rights and so on as well. So that's a good example where you can actually work together with a government that you disagree with, because there are legislation that you pass through that's a benefit to society in a wider sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is just, I suppose, about the changes within the SNP. Lately, we've had Nicola Sturgeon leaving, then we've had Hamza leaving. Now we've got John Swinney. And, one of the things that struck me in the past sort of week, John Swinney, I think, was talking about Nicola Sturgeon, and he said that he thought Nicola Sturgeon was still quite an asset to the SNP. And I'm just wondering, as somebody who is, quite close to Nicola Sturgeon, you know her very well, would you agree that she's still an asset to the SNP, or, are there challenges there given, the Operation Branch form and all the rest of it? How do you see her in relation to the SNP these days?
So, of course, I did work very closely with her when she was First Minister and I was leader of the SNP, and she was an extraordinary individual to work with, actually a very collegiate figure to work with as well, and one that I would say in many respects was really inspirational in the leadership that she gave. And I think in particular, Hannah, what she did over the COVID period, and I know what she was going through day after day after day, the work she was putting into doing the press conferences almost on a daily basis, week after week, month after month. Of course, we all acknowledge that through the COVID crisis, everybody made mistakes. But my goodness, a woman that was able to use her talents and to show leadership the way that she did, not just, I think, perhaps speaking to people in Scotland, but people right across East Island. And I think more broadly, Nicola was well regarded internationally of a woman of substance and depth that I actually think was an extraordinary leader for our country. And some of the things I spoke about earlier about, you know, the child payment that we have, for example, that desire to drive young people out of poverty. There are many policy areas that I think we can point to the legacy that Nicola will have.
So you think she is still an asset to the SNP now?
Yeah, she is. Obviously, there are challenges about what we have to go through with operating branch form. I know that, and we need to get to the end of that. But Nicola's journey is not over, both in terms of assisting the case for independence, and I'm sure a role that Nicola will play, whether it's at home or whether it's internationally in the years to come.
So you'll be tuning into ITV on the 4th of July to see her share her opinions on everything.
Well, I wish her every success as she's doing that. I suspect I'm going to be out and about doing things on media myself that night, but I'll maybe catch up with her after it.
Most likely. And my last question, because I know we don't have a lot of time, is just obviously, you know, as we've said, you're no longer an MP, you're not standing in this election. You know, someone with your experience, do you not think that you might have a strong voice and a strong contribution to make in somewhere like the House of Lords, for example?
Well, the SNP doesn't accept nominations to the House of Lords. Look, I hope I still got a part.
No one ever asked you though.
No, I haven't.
No, never.
No, it's not. Well, look, there isn't a mechanism to do that, Hannah. Look, my life in some respects has been compartmentalised. I had a career in the city. I had my own consultancy business I ran for a decade, and I've had 10 years in Parliament. I would like to think that I've still got a role to play in assisting the SNP and assisting the cause of independence. I very much want to see Scotland being a fairer, a greener, a wealthier country. And I'll see what the options are in terms of me being able to have an influence in that. I mean, I've spoken about industrial strategy, and I really want to try and help to make sure that we do drive that investment into the economy in Scotland. It's the responsibility that all of us have, you know, that desire to drive people out of poverty. So in many respects, I'm not done. I know there's been some speculation about whether or not I return to the Scottish Parliament in 2026. Who knows? At the moment, I'm going to take a little bit of time to reflect. And I may.
You're not going to the House of Lords.
No, I've no plans as things stand at the moment to go back into politics, either elected or unelected in that way.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ian, and good luck for whatever the future holds.
Okay, thank you.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
You had Ian Blackford being quite open there, I think. Some interesting responses to your questions. What was the most illuminating for you there?
Well, the fact that I'm not Jeremy Paxman when it comes to interviews. No, I think that his, you know, quite clearly he's not ruling out coming back to politics in some form, I think is quite interesting. And also I thought his answer when I asked him about Nicola Sturgeon was quite interesting, because I said, do you think that she's still an asset? And, you know, he quite clearly wanted to talk about all her achievements in the past. But of course, all of those achievements or perceived achievements came before any operation branch form, you know, announcements or developments. And I think that's really what I wanted to know is, does he still think that she's an asset? And, you know, he wasn't quite as forthcoming when I asked him that second time, you know, but he did say, yes, he does think that Nicola Sturgeon is still an asset to the party.
It's interesting, though, that he did say, tentatively, but he did say that the SNP should apologise for some of their failings in terms of the big, I imagine he's talking about the big infrastructure projects like the ferries. That's what he means, rather. And that's certainly the first sign kind of any kind of contrition from anybody. And then the second thing is the fact that he's not completely ruling out Holyrood
Mm-hmm.
2026.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because he can't get in the House of Commons because that's against SNP policy?
You mean House of Lords?
House of Lords, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really buy this. Oh, there's no mechanism. I mean, there is a mechanism. You're nominated and you either accept it or not. You know, like if he dropped out of the SNP, he could go in. You know, kind of ordinary people are allowed to go into the House of Lords. They just need a pal to put them in there. So,
well, what was really interesting was a few months ago, we had an interview with the Lord Speaker, Lord McFall,
yeah.
who we were talking about, you know, class and politicians, working class from Dumbarton, who actually said to us that he would welcome, you know, an SNP politician in the House of Lords. He wanted more diversity, and I presume, you know, of opinion, you know, as well. So, I mean, he's a Labour peer, but it's really interesting that, you know, I don't think anybody would say no other than the SNP.
And I don't know if all SNPs would say no. But I don't know. But yeah, and then I thought the apology, the where Ian Blackford said that, you know, he thought that there should be an apology for some of these scandals, like the ferries, like the A9. I think that is interesting because you don't hear that very much. It's usually defensiveness and blame on Westminster or on someone else or a different minister or a different party. So to actually just say, no, there needs to be an apology.
And to be fair, you know, John Swinney is certainly more open. He is not always, you know, on the attack. He is listening more. You can tell that.
Although he was attacking Anas Sarwar quite a lot last night in the debate.
He was. But in terms of listening to voters, I think he's showing, you know, that he is, or attempting to show that he is.
Yeah, I think he's got a less kind of preaching style than Nicola Sturgeon, where Nicola Sturgeon, I think anyway, would almost sort of tell people what they thought. And he is more interested in asking people what they think.
Yeah, it's a definite change, but whether it's come soon enough, fast enough, who knows? Hannah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Pleasure, as always.
You can find Planet Holyrood on your usual channels, YouTube, and we're on Spotify as well. And we will see you tomorrow.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.